Let me move on to motion number 2 of the House. The Minister to move.
Beg to move.
Order. The question is on the order paper. The question is on the order paper. As many that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to the 7 o'clock motion. Oh, noted. Right. We now come to the motion relating to police, and I call the Minister to move the motion. Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I beg to move that the Police Grant Report England and Wales 2026-27, which was laid before Parliament on the 28th of January this year, be approved. Before I come to the detail of the settlement, please can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition in Prime Minister's Question Time, adding our condolences and our thoughts following the stabbing in Kingsbury High in Brent yesterday. I know we all hope that those who've been injured will be able to recover and that justice will be done in a very difficult situation. I also want to take the opportunity, before I come to the detail, to pay tribute to the men and women who work to protect the rest of us from harm. I did not need to become Policing Minister to appreciate the debt of gratitude that is owed to these dedicated public servants. But it is right to say that having the honour of serving in this post has given me a daily insight of the remarkable work of our police. I'm sure the whole House will join me in expressing gratitude to the officers, staff and volunteers who are, as we speak, performing their duties with professionalism, skill and courage. We are all fortunate to have so many brave individuals dedicated to keeping us safe, whether they be first responders turning towards danger, PCSOs immersed in their neighbourhoods, or staff working behind the scenes to track the latest threats to the public. And that is why our record cash investment in the policing system for England and Wales is so important. We are determined to provide our police forces with the resources they need to continue their vital work, as well as support to invest in their future. In 2026-27, overall funding for the policing system in England and Wales will be up to £21 billion. This is an increase of £1.3 billion compared to 2025-26. Funding available to local police forces will total up to £18.4 billion, an increase of £796 million from 2025-26. This is an increase of 2.3% in real terms. Of this funding increase, £432 million will come from additional government grant, whilst £364 million will come from police precept, assuming PCCs choose to maximise the £15 limit. Furthermore, we have worked with a small group of forces who evidenced particular financial pressures to agree additional precept flexibility. The settlement also includes at least £1.2 billion for counter-terrorism policing to preserve national security and guard against the most severe threats, as is the primary duty of any government.
I thank the Minister for giving way. As she's getting into the detail of the funding package, will she just accept 2 broad points? The first is, on Labour's watch, the overall number of police officers in England has fallen. And second, because of cost pressures on police forces from other decisions taken by her government, the Association of Police Commissioners has said there's a £500 million shortfall in the allocation of funding from this government to police forces.
With £21 billion going in overall into policing and £18.4 billion direct going into our police forces, I do not accept that there is a shortfall in funding. There is more money going into policing this year than there was last year by hundreds of millions of pounds. On his first point, and I suspect the front bench will try to make the same points, we have, having worked with police chiefs, both introduced a big package of reform, but also removed the arbitrary headcount targets for officer numbers that local forces found so difficult to navigate because they were pushed into recruiting officers and putting them behind desks to do jobs that staff could do. We are not going to judge our police on the number of different types of roles, but we are going to judge our police on their outcomes, which is why we are setting targets, which is why we are driving productivity, and why we are focused on tackling crime, not on arbitrary numbers. As we are, I will give way here.
Thank you, first of all, for the report coming forward. I think the figure that was mentioned by the Minister was 1.2 billion for take on terrorism, an anti-terrorism role, extra money coming in. Obviously, we in Northern Ireland have a particular critical role when it comes to addressing the issue of terrorism. It's still active in a minor way, but still active in Northern Ireland. And because we also have a border which we have to patrol, we'll address the issues of immigration, issues of theft of farm agricultural machinery, and all those things come into the picture. Within the Barnett Consequential, could I ask the Minister, will extra money therefore be coming to the PSNI in Northern Ireland to help us? Thank you so much. Sorry.
Well, of course, policing in itself is devolved, but the terrorism risk involves working across the whole of the United Kingdom, and the Security Minister, my honourable friend, will be working very closely to make sure we are working across all the 4 parts of this United Kingdom to make sure we're offering the support and as we need to be.
For the Policing Minister, moving on, she will know West Mercia Police, Shropshire, Herefordshire, Worcestershire, a very good force in many ways. But is she aware that West Mercia, which will impact the Wrekin constituency, is about to see the first fall in police numbers in over a decade, and likely to see approximately 20 frontline police officers removed as a result of what the local Police and Crime Commissioner calls a shortfall in government funding?
To repeat, every force in the country has had an increase in their funding this year, and we are making sure we have the right funding to support our objectives. What I would say, again, on police officer numbers is what we saw under the last government was a reduction of 20,000 police officers and then a rush to recruit 20,000 police officers. The result of that recruitment was, for example, in the last 2 years of the Conservative government, a 60% rise in retail crime. The outcomes did not follow that arbitrary focus on numbers. We are interested in police outcomes. We are interested in driving down crime and preventing crime, but we also believe that we should give our chiefs the flexibility within their local workforce to understand what roles they need. Police staff are exceptionally important in many different roles. The number of PCSOs under the last government halved. It wasn't even government policy, it just happened because they didn't have a proper workforce plan, they didn't think about these things, and then in the latter years they didn't allow flexibility for local officers. We believe that chiefs can make the right decisions about their workforce locally, and we will be establishing a workforce plan nationally for the first time that the Conservatives failed to do, to make sure we have the right resources in the right places at the right time.
Will she give way?
Gosh, all right.
Well, I'm grateful to the Police Minister and my constituency neighbour for giving way. She references the different kinds of people working in the police workforce and how police chiefs should have flexibility. But in the last year, not only have police officer numbers fallen by 1,300, but police staff numbers have fallen as well by 529. PCSOs have fallen in the last year by 204, special constables 514, and even volunteers have fallen too. Every single number has fallen. Is she proud of that?
Knife murders have fallen by 27%. Knife crime has fallen by 8%. That is nearly 4,500 fewer knife offences in the last year than the previous year. We are focused on outcomes, and the Right Honourable Gentleman will know that proper police reform involves looking at the staff, looking at the workforce, also looking at new technology. He knows and is a big fan of live facial recognition, as are we, and we are taking out of the system efficiencies to the tune of £350 million during this Parliament, just in efficiencies where money was being wasted under the previous government, that we will strip out of the system. We will be focused through the new reforms on outcomes and on delivering a local police force that will tackle the epidemic of everyday crime and a national police service that will tackle the complex crime.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And first, can I apologise that I can't stay till the very end of this because I have a debate in Westminster Hall, but I did need to ask the Minister a question. The Minister talks about outcomes. So is she as shocked as I am that the Labour Cheshire Police Crime Commissioner has already spent £200,000 on 2 listening exercises, is expected to spend another £400,000 on listening exercises, when really they're putting up the preset by 6.7%. The police force will have to make redundancies. Doesn't she agree with me that that money shouldn't be going on vanity projects, but on frontline policing?
I would suggest that perhaps the previous government would have benefited from listening to the public, and there is no harm in listening to the public. Indeed, it is our role as elected representatives to do so. One of the challenges that we are grappling with through the white paper reform is how do we make sure there is accountability at the hyper-local and at the national level to make sure we do listen to our constituents and make sure we are targeting the crimes that they care about.
I noticed today the same Labour Police and Crime Commissioner has put an advert up for £45,000 to £55,000 for a senior public relation officer for himself and other vanity projects. Surely that money should be spent on PSOs and police on the ground and not on himself.
I don't know if the Right Honourable Lady has anybody in her team that helps her with communications. Perhaps she does. Nobody? No? I suspect she does have somebody who helps with communications, and most honourable members in this place do. And I think ensuring the public know what is happening is also a good thing. The Honourable Lady will know that we have said several times in this place as well that we are abolishing the role of Police and Crime Commissioner, not in any way because of the work that they have done. They have done a lot of brilliant work, and I have some fantastic colleagues that I will continue working with until 2028.
That nearly 650,000.
Forgive me. Order. Minister, are you taking intervention or not? I missed that. Well, continue, Minister, continue.
I suggest maybe we carry on this conversation over a cup of coffee another time. And we are also investing £1.4 billion into the wider policing system to continue our progress towards adopting the modern, cutting-edge technologies that will better enable the police to perform their most critical function, keeping the public safe. The government is supporting the police in their ongoing fight against knife crime by maintaining funding for serious violence reduction activity in every force area, alongside £28 million through our County Lines programme to disrupt organised crime and protect vulnerable and exploited children. And £119 million will go towards our ambitious programme of police reform, which will establish a new national centre to support AI across policing, enable the national rollout of live facial recognition, and strengthen how data is used to support operational policing.
The policing minister, she's being very generous, as she always is, and I hope she'll be generous in her reply as well. On AI, I mean, obviously AI is already playing a part in policing, and I would hope that everybody that wants to see crime reduced would support it. But it's support with caveats, as far as I'm concerned. There does need to be legislative oversight, that it is regulated and not abused. So when will the government be coming forward with that legislation, which which the Home Secretary has mentioned is going to come forward? And just very briefly on police reform, does she recognise that West Mercia oversees a rural and semi-rural area, and any reconfiguration, restructuring should recognise the unique challenges of rural police forces as opposed to, let's say, the neighbouring force of West Midlands?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for those 2 points that he asked in one question. On AI, he's absolutely right. We need to make sure, and I hope this is now the policy of the opposition, it wasn't when they were in government, that there should be an understanding of what AI is used for and what it isn't. On the live facial recognition side, which is important and we are expanding, we are consulting at the moment on how that is used and how it is not. On AI, there is a huge amount of work going on in different police forces, and most areas have ethics committees. They have structures where they do consider and talk about the use of AI. There are certain rules around never, for example, using AI to make a decision or to have a judgment, but just to give information is very important. And we know with the recent case in terms of the West Midlands how easy it is to end up making a mistake, and we want to obviously avoid that. And on the funding point, we are baking into our funding, reform point, we are baking into the reform structures that at the hyper-local level, everybody in their ward will have a named contactable officer, that there will be targets on 999 response times, on 999 answering call times, and on responding to non-urgent calls. I understand and I hear, and I've had that message from several MPs, that that rural areas are concerned that where there's a larger force, that will mean they get less resources. That is not the intention whatsoever. Indeed, quite the opposite. By having, instead of 43 forces making 43 decisions with 86 decision makers, and spending money in 43 different ways, we will make savings that will mean that we can put more money into frontline policing in his constituency.
To the Minister, and I'm reassured to hear those words, except I'm not hearing how, because we've all seen that when you move to a larger force, the big cities, the big metropolitan areas have a political and a kind of almost a gravity way of pulling resources to them. So it needs something structural. So perhaps the Minister may not have an answer today, but would she consider looking at ways of backing up that hope to turn it into something on which rural communities in my constituency can actually rely?
Yes, as my honourable friend has just said, as two people from cities, we feel the same way quite often, that we don't always get the resources that we're also pushing for. Everybody will be, of course, interested to ensure in this place that their constituents get the funding that they need. We have set up, we are about to set up a independent review into what the structures will be going forward. He can also read the white paper that sets out some of these ideas, but the independent review will be completed by the summer, and that will set out how many forces, how they will work, and how they will operate. And I think I'm going to make a little bit of progress, if that is okay. So, policing reform, I just want to touch on that a little bit more. Last month, as I said, we released the white paper setting out how we'll create a policing system fit for the future. Taken together, our plans amount to the biggest reforms for almost 200 years. They will see improvements to police governance, force mergers to unlock greater efficiencies, and the creation of a national police service capable of fighting sophisticated criminals at a national level. These reforms are overdue, and we know that they will not be easy, but we also know that they are necessary. Our overarching aim is clear: to establish a new policing model in which local forces protect their communities and national police protect us all.
Would the Minister allow a brief on that point?
Yes, I will.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the Minister for giving way. One of the challenges that we've always had in Staffordshire is that because of a manufacturing site in Tamworth and also because of the politics of Stoke-on-Trent, we've often had to deal with very complex national issues around far-right activism and Hizb ut-Tahrir activism. With the increasing in police forces and with the national responsibilities, how is the Minister going to make sure that some of those local specialisms that we've built up in Staffordshire continue to be deployable in those places? Because sometimes our neighbourhood policing is actually the first barrier to dealing with some of the escalated problems further on down the line. It's how we make, so is she able to say how that knowledge transfer will carry on?
Yeah. Can I thank my honourable friend for that question? And several people have raised similar concerns. I think my answer would be that by creating a much simpler system than we actually have now, that movement of information and resources and people and the specialisms where they exist will be easier to maintain, because at the moment we have lots of different national bodies that we will be bringing together. We have the ROCUs, the regional organised crime units, that don't have a legislative basis and are funded in a sort of range of different slightly peculiar ways. We have specialist units sitting in different forces across the country looking at different things, whether that's modern slavery or funding helicopters. We have the peculiar system that doesn't make much sense, and by streamlining it, so we have a national service, regional service and local police areas, we can enable that flow of information and specialism to be, I think, clearer. But I understand his point, and it's been raised by several people, and we will certainly be very mindful of it.
Would the Minister This has been extremely generous. I met with the Chief Constable of Humberside last week. As the Minister will know, it's the leading force in the country. It's got the highest results. So local people are concerned about a reorganisation which could be expensive, that could draw resources away from a successful police system. How will the preparation for these changes engage with the Chief Constable in Humberside and others who are helping set very high standards now, and which we don't want to see diminished in future?
I think he points to a challenge, which is that some police forces perform brilliantly, others perform less well. In the main, there's only one force in Engage at the moment, but in the main, forces will be good at certain things, bad at others, and it will vary across the country. Our aim is to make sure we have brilliance everywhere, and we are working very closely with police chiefs. I think this is the first time we have had a reform programme that has not had the criticism that perhaps you might expect from different aspects of policing. We almost to the point where we sort of sat back and kind of wondered, maybe have we got this wrong? Everybody is agreeing with us. It is really powerful to sit with police chiefs, and it is really powerful to sit with officers who are rank and file, as I did last week, and hear the challenges that they face and the solutions that they have. And we are suggesting the same solutions. And of course, it will be a difficult journey. No reform programme isn't, but we are making sure we're engaging with policing on every step of the way. I am going to make some progress, I'm afraid. I know that many honourable members have talked about the funding formula, and I know that in opposition, indeed, I called on the previous government to review the funding formula regularly, and we will, of course, as part of this reform journey, have to reform the funding formula because we are changing the structures, so I can reassure members that we will do that. This year's settlement represents a first step in our reform journey. We've streamlined the way we distribute funding and put flexibility back into the hands of police chiefs, allowing them to focus on the priorities of their communities and of this government. Madam Deputy Speaker, one of those priorities has to be neighbourhood policing, as it is the bedrock of the British policing model. A central aim of this government's agenda has been to restore neighbourhood policing after it was catastrophically eroded in the years before the general election. Our efforts are already having an impact, with nearly 2,400 more neighbourhood officers already in our communities, and the Neighbourhood Policing Guarantee delivering named contactable officers in every area. But we must and will go further, and through this settlement we will build on the progress so far. Having listened to police feedback from police chiefs and PCCs and select committees and HMIC, FRS and others, we are removing arbitrary headcount targets for overall officer numbers. We believe success should be judged not just by numbers, but by how they deliver the outcomes that the public want to see. Our focus is on putting police where they can make the most difference, which often is within our communities, tackling the crime and antisocial behaviour that blights cities, towns and villages. Therefore, we are ring-fencing £363 million of funding to get 1,750 more police officers and PCSOs into neighbourhood policing roles in the next year. I will carry on making some progress, I'm afraid. Through the continued growth in neighbourhood policing, we will restore the vital link between police forces and the communities they serve. Madam Deputy Speaker, we also believe there's significant potential to revolutionise police efficiency and productivity. We are continuing to work with forces through the efficiency programme towards the target I spoke of earlier, £354 million of cashable savings by the end of this Parliament. As set out in our white paper, there are further avenues we must explore to bring policing into the modern age and deliver better value. Meanwhile, new structures will remove duplication and the National Police Service will allow us to deal with the biggest threats on the national level. This government believes in doing things right once, not in 43 different ways. Not a single penny of taxable money should be wasted. By investing in new technology, taking away administrative burdens and moving officers out from desks and into our communities, we move closer to that goal. Madam Deputy Speaker, in 2026-27, we are continuing to invest in the police, supporting them with a record level of cash funding to do what they do best, keep us all safe. We know that it is the first duty of government and that it requires a highly effective, I will not on this occasion, and it requires a highly effective and efficient police service. A service that is equipped for the crime-fighting challenges of now and also prepared for the future. Ultimately, the test of police efficiency is the absence of crime and disorder and not the visible evidence of police action in dealing with them. These are not my words, but are Robert Peel's principles of policing laid out almost 200 years ago. And yet they are just as relevant today. We believe that policing should be about keeping people safe. Of course, the visible presence of police officers on our streets is vital, and this settlement aims to get officers away from desks and back on the front line. Equally, we cannot... I will give way one more time.
I thank the Minister for giving way. It's most generous of her. A point that has been raised by my Chief Constable is about Labour's new sentencing bill, and criminals won't be sentenced for levels less than 12 months, which says they will now be man-marking criminals on the street, and it will cost them approximately £1.6 million a year to do that. So can the Minister explain how she plans to address that issue in costs and in man-hours?
Well, there's very significant investment going into probation alongside those reforms, and of course, as she would expect, myself and colleagues in the Home Office are working very closely with the Ministry of Justice to make sure we are equipped to respond to any changes. And of course, it is absolutely true that it is often right for people to have non-prison sentences, whether that is tagging or other punishments, and I think there is some really innovative work that we can do on that going forward, but we are having regular meetings with our police colleagues to make sure we are ready for the changes. Equally, we cannot forget the staff essential to our policing system, like the PCSOs working with vulnerable individuals, victim support staff helping people through the aftermath of crimes, or tech experts working in police HQs to track a stolen phone. This settlement recognises this and puts power back in the hands of local forces, allowing them to prioritise the right mix of skills for a modern workforce. We are giving them the resources, up to £18.4 billion, to invest in this workforce and supply them with the tools and powers they need to do their jobs. Madam Deputy Speaker, we know that to people across England and Wales, what matters most is not what we say, but what we do. We are backing up our words with action, restoring neighbourhood policing, driving down harmful threats and equipping forces for the challenges of modern crime fighting. But we will not stop there. We will maintain momentum this year and beyond, reforming policing and striving to give law-abiding citizens the safety and security they deserve. This settlement will aid us in delivering these aims, and I commend it to the House.
The question is as on the order paper, and I call the Shadow Secretary of State, Chris Philp.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let me... Go on, this will be good.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to, before the Shadow Minister got into his speech, in 2010, the number of police officers in Staffordshire was around 1,000. That has only just got back to that figure this year. We have never had anything but a Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner, and we've only ever had a Conservative Council and a Conservative Government. Is he able to tell me who I should hold accountable for that decimation of neighbourhood policing under the last government?
Well, he raises the last government. The last government left office with record ever numbers of police. In March 2024, when the last recruitment intake took place, there were 149,769 officers by head count, the highest in history, and that was 3,000 higher than in 2010. And since the Shadow Minister asked about outcomes, according to the Crime Survey of England and Wales, overall crime fell during the time of the last government by about 50%. Now, I was about to say, before I perhaps foolishly... Goodness me, this is getting very congested already, but I can't possibly resist his entreaty.
I'm extremely grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. He's been most generous and he's barely begun. But I must have misheard, because I've listened to so many speeches on the topic of law and order from the party opposite, and he must have misspoken. He's suggesting that not only was there a record number of police officers left by the last Conservative government, but crime overall fell by 50%. Have these words ever been issued by the ministers, or do they try to mislead the public at every opportunity? If I'm...
Order. You want to stand up and correct the record? Go ahead.
Of course, I was saying no individual, but inadvertently, of course, in any minister's case.
Let's be mindful of our language. Chris Philp.
Well, no, it is true that members opposite forget to mention the record police numbers in March 2024 or the reduction in crime. There was actually more than 50% over the period. Now, look, I will happily give away quite a lot, but I haven't even started, and I've given away a couple of times already. And I was just going to start by echoing the Police Minister's tribute to police officers up and down the country who every day put themselves in the line of danger. I've attended the annual police memorial service and seen and met with the families of officers who have tragically lost their lives while keeping us safe, and they should remain, I think, at the front of our minds during this afternoon's debate. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Police Minister threw around some big numbers earlier about the increase in police funding that has been announced. But the increase for frontline police forces, the increase being given to police and crime commissioners, amounting to 4.5%, is not enough to meet the funding pressures and the cost pressures which they face. I spoke earlier today to Police and Crime Commissioner Roger Hurst of Essex, who is, as she knows, the finance lead for the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, and Roger Hurst told me that in his assessment, this funding settlement is about £100 million short of the cost pressures police forces will face, meaning they will have to find cuts. And it's not just Roger. The National Police Chiefs Council, the body that represents Chief Constables, said on the 28th of January, and I quote, "Many forces are planning service reductions with consequences for officer numbers, staff numbers and resilience." In other words, both police and crime commissioners and the National Police Chiefs Council say this funding settlement is inadequate to maintain police resources. And it's not just them. The Labour Police and Crime Commissioner of Avon and Somerset has just had to cancel the recruitment of 70 new officers because of, in her words, lower than expected government funding. And the Cambridgeshire Police and Crime Commissioner says the settlement falls short of what is required. The Chief Constable of Cleveland says they face a £4 million funding gap under this settlement. The Essex Police and Crime Commissioner says the government settlement is insufficient to cover rising costs, as I said a moment ago. And Manchester, Greater Manchester Police, say they face a £32 million funding gap. So in summary, Madam Deputy Speaker, this settlement is not enough to enable police forces up and down the country to maintain their level of service. They're going to shrink and their services will be diminished. Now, she mentioned the money being provided for the neighbourhood policing officers, 1,750. Well, in fact, she didn't mention the amount of money being provided by the government, which is £50 million for that purpose. Now, if you divide the one number by the other, you get to £29,000 per officer. And as the National Police Chiefs Council have pointed out, the cost of an officer is on average £68,000. So the government is only funding 42% of the cost, leaving the other 58% completely unfunded. She also forgot to mention in her speech that the government is completely cancelling the funding for antisocial behaviour hotspot patrolling, something introduced by the last government, which frankly should have been continued. And when it comes to the way the money is distributed, it remains the case the funding formula is deeply unfair. Change is long overdue, but I would ask the Minister to urgently bring forward changes to the funding formula to make it fairer. The Metropolitan Police receives by far the highest funding in the country, even accounting for the National Capital City Grant and CT funding. If you adjust for that, they receive £439 per head. But the lowest funded forces, such as Dorset, £255 a head, Essex, £236, Cambridgeshire, £237, or Wiltshire, just £235 per head. They are inadequately funded, and the funding formula urgently needs updating. And I'll ask the Police Minister or her colleague, when she sums up, to address that point. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the consequence of this inadequate funding settlement is just the same as the consequence of last year's inadequate funding settlement, when my shadow ministerial colleague, the member for Stockton South, stood at this dispatch box and he warned the minister's predecessor that the funding settlement would lead to reductions in police numbers. He warned very clearly. And we now know that that has come to pass, because the most recent figures, just published a few weeks ago, show that in the year to September 2025, so a year entirely when Labour were in government, the number of police officers fell by 1,318. Numbers being cut under this Labour government. Now, they say they want to get staff. Let me just finish the point, then I'll give way. They say they want to hire staff instead to do jobs behind desks. But the number of police staff fell as well by 529. They talk about PCSOs. Well, the number of PCSOs fell by 204. Special constables down by 514. Police volunteers down by 429. Under this Labour government, that is a reduction in police workforce of 3,000 in just 1 year. Under this Labour government, they are not funding the police properly, and they should be ashamed of themselves. Yes.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. It's right, there are a huge amount of police staff that are never seen, support staff, admin staff, call centre staff, whatever they might be, and they play an important part in delivering the police services to all of our communities. But is it not the case that visibility in policing is needed, and it is only police officers who are warranted to make arrests when crime is committed? So for all the wonderful people working in the back office of all of our police forces, we still need police officers in the communities tackling the antisocial behaviour that he references, turning up at least occasionally at the parish council where the local police officer still has a reference in the agenda, and visibility absolutely critical around the fear of crime, and a warrant with a police officer absolutely critical in enforcing the law and making arrests.
Is absolutely right. Only uniformed officers or warranted officers can make arrests. And that is why the fall in police numbers under this Labour government is just in 1 second, is so shocking. Now, they talk about neighbourhood officers specifically, but that, of course, ignores things like crime investigation. It ignores things like 999 response. It ignores specialist officers who investigate, for example, sexual offences. It focuses on only one part of policing when total numbers are falling, of course.
Gentlemen, welcome the fact that there are 2,400 more police in our neighbourhoods now than there were at the start of this government.
But the point is, she's cut other areas to do that. She's cut 999 response. She's cut crime investigations. She can use smoke and mirrors by focusing on only one part of the police world. The fact is, total police numbers are down, police staff are down, PCSOs are down, specials are down, and police volunteers are down. all under this Labour government. Now, I think his colleague from Harlow got there first, so I probably ought to give way there first.
I thank the Shadow Secretary of State for giving way, and I do thank him for lobbying on behalf of Essex to get more funding, because clearly I want more funding for Essex as much as he does. I would just quote, I also declare an interest. I've stood against Roger Hurst in 2 elections, but I've got a lot of time for the work he does as a Police and Crime Commissioner. I really want to make that clear. He says in his own website, however, that he welcomes another 69 new recruits into Essex Police, making it the force bigger and stronger than it has ever been before, which doesn't quite fit with what the Shadow Secretary of State said earlier.
Well, Roger Hurst, in common with many police and crime commissioners, has done a valiant job in the face of the inadequate funding. But as he said himself, and I quote Roger verbatim, the government settlement is insufficient to cover rising costs. That is what Roger himself has said. Now, Let's look at outcomes, which the Police Minister mentioned. And it is a matter of deep concern, Madam Deputy Speaker, that under this Labour government, shoplifting has gone up by 10% to record ever levels. Robbery from business premises is up by 66% in the last year. Antisocial behaviour has gone up. Rape has gone up by 7% under this government. And sexual offences have gone up by 8%, of course.
When he says that rape has gone up, does he mean that the recorded crime of rape has gone up? And does he recognise that actually everybody in this House should celebrate when women feel more comfortable to come forward to the police?
Well, that isn't what she was saying when the rape figures were going up under the last government. Once is enough. And the fact that reported rapes are going up, to the extent that reflects increased levels of offending, that would be a serious concern. Go on.
What is actually going up is rape charging, and actually, I just to make the record straight, I never ever criticised increased reporting of rape. What I criticised was the decimation under his government of rape charging that led to the worst record in history.
Well, she will know that the change in the rape charge rate followed the disclosure rule changes after the Liam Allen case back in about 2017, and the last government set up Operation Soteria and a whole rape task force designed to increase the rape charging rates, and indeed they were increasing prior to the last election, and I very much hope that this government is continuing the work of Operation Soteria that was started by the last government. Now, in relation to the police reforms the Police Minister referred to, while there are some functions like counter-terrorism and fighting serious and organised crime that may well be better provided on a national basis, we will certainly be opposing on this side of the House the creation of approximately 10 regional mega forces that will see county forces essentially abolished, merged into enormous entities that are very far removed from the communities they serve, which will inevitably see resources drawn away from towns and villages towards large cities. And there is no evidence that large forces are either more efficient or better performing. In fact, the two arguably worst performing forces in the country, the Met and West Midlands, are also the largest forces in the country. And the history of Police Scotland, where they merged 8 police forces into one, has not been a particularly happy episode, and is certainly not a good case study for what is being proposed. So I would ask the Minister to think again about the creation of these mega forces when the examples of the West Midlands, the Met and Police Scotland indicate that large police forces do not perform well. Now, there is one area, Madam Deputy Speaker, where I will agree with the Minister, and indeed more than agree with her, actively support what she is trying to do, and that is the use of technology in catching criminals, and in particular the use of live facial recognition, which she and I have both seen being used very effectively in Croydon town centre and indeed across London, where in the last year 963 arrests have occurred as a result of using live facial recognition of criminals who would not otherwise have been caught, including a man wanted for a double rape, dating back 8 years, who would not have been caught but for the use of live facial recognition. So I'd be interested to hear her plans for rolling this technology out across the country, accelerating its use dramatically. And I'd also be interested in her assurance that the consultation she's doing on the use of this technology is going to be carefully calibrated, because there is a risk that the sort of people on the fringes, left and right, who don't like this technology, will try and lobby her and will try and persuade her to introduce all kinds of rules and regulations and red tape. And if she gives in to their requests, she may end up inadvertently creating a sort of very bureaucratic system that in practice is very difficult for the police to operate. So I would urge her to think about the mainstream majority who strongly support this technology. Certainly in Croydon, the public support this technology, understanding that it catches criminals and understanding that if you're not on the watch list, your image is immediately and automatically deleted. And I just ask her to make sure that if she does change the rules, she does it in a way that is quite light touch and it doesn't end up potentially strangling what could be one of the most promising and effective crime-fighting technologies this country has seen for many, many decades. And I really hope that is the approach that she plans to take. Madam Deputy, one last time.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, and he will have noted, as I did, that the Police Minister failed to answer the how. She said she wished to make sure that the creation of these massive new police organisations didn't lead to policing becoming more distant and remote and hard to influence, not least for rural communities, but she couldn't tell us how it will be done. Does he share my concern that we will end up with a larger, more bureaucratic system which is remote from ordinary people, and for people in rural East Yorkshire in particular, they're going to feel far away from decision-making?
I think my right honourable friend puts it brilliantly. He has articulated exactly why the forced creation of regional megaforces is likely to be a backwards step. Madam Deputy Speaker, this I'm done. He may find that a matter of considerable relief. Madam Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, sometimes in conclusion are the most popular words I utter in a speech. In conclusion, this.
Right honourable friend, give way before concluding.
This is the last time.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. But at a time of great pressure on police budgets and my Cheshire police force having to make redundancies, was my right honourable friend as concerned as I was that the Minister felt that the Labour Police Crime Commissioner could spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on vanity projects and accepting it rather than condemning it, and that money should go on frontline policing?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, and it was disappointing the Police Minister did not substantively respond. She is quite right. Spending money on loads of communications officers instead of police officers to catch criminals is a misallocation of resources, and my right honourable friend is right to call it out. I will conclude here, Madam Deputy Speaker, by saying that this police funding settlement is not adequate to meet funding pressures. It will lead to continued reductions in police numbers across England and Wales, which will leave our constituents and our countries less safe.
Andy McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I do thank the Ministers for her remarks, and she'll find very considerable support for the broad thrust of what she's saying, especially around the streamlining and the new policing models. And I know she's thinking very seriously about how to get that best return on that reorganisation in terms of serious and organised crime, being alive to those regional specialisms and expertise that already exist. So I do thank her for that, and for her commitment to the better funding for our police force after the disastrous period of austerity under the Conservatives. I do want to put some challenges to my colleague, because there are some local concerns I have. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, after hearing from the Shadow Minister about his remarks about police numbers, I've just got to say to him, in all candour, the reduction of 20,000 police officers in the name of austerity was one of the most deeply reckless and stupid things a government could ever do. And I'd just like the Minister, the Shadow Minister opposite, to come to the dispatch box and apologise for that gross dereliction of duty. I mean, the Honourable Member chunters and laughs from a sedentary position. I will in a minute. But if he would like to apologise to the country for the damage that caused, because I can tell him that the removing so many officers at a stroke removing so many officers at a stroke had a devastating impact. And looking at those raw numbers, you did it. The honourable member Chunters, he fails to comprehend. He fails to comprehend. I'll happily do so.
On talking about events of 14 years ago when that government were fixing the financial mess Gordon Brown left behind, I would remind him the last government left office with record-ever police numbers, and I suggest he reserves his ire for the falling police numbers that are happening today under this Labour government.
Speaker, the penny hasn't dropped with the spokesperson opposite. Not to understand for 1 minute how that translated in our communities. That's the issue, because you simply did not take into consideration the loss of expertise. You cannot replace those with recruits overnight. It was the most stupid thing a government could do, and I'll happily give way.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The honourable gentleman came right onto my point at the end there. That was the devastating thing. Ripping the experience out of our police force and then dressing up new recruits as somehow a replacement for that led to higher crime in my constituency, and I know it led to higher crime in his constituency.
My honourable friend makes an absolutely pertinent point. These are the lived experiences of our constituents. That's the consequences that they had to live with. And it's said from the benches opposite, it's because of the financial situation they were left in. Of course, austerity was a political choice, and the party opposite deliberately ploughed this furrow with disastrous consequences. And they should have they should have the humility to get up and acknowledge the error that they made. Crack on.
Well, gentlemen, I've never heard someone so passionately misinformed in my life. They left a massive gaping overspend, the national debt. In other speeches, he'll mention the national debt going up under the Conservatives. We brought it down every year and fought and reduced crime as well. Left, having recovered the country, record levels of police officers and a 50% cut in crime. And he puts on this faux outrage. The lived reality for his communities and mine was an improved service and a balanced book.
The honourable gentleman should not consider it to be full outrage. I lived in my constituency throughout that period and the damage that it caused. And we should acknowledge the damage that was caused. I'm going to be challenging my own government. I am not. I'm trying to be objective about these issues. Well, I will, but what's got to be understood in this place is that the consequences of those terrible decisions that were made. I do, Madam Deputy Speaker, now want to turn on, because there are issues around the Cleveland Police that I want to ask the Minister to address, because they are real issues. Because there is more to be done around improvement in funding, which does remain uneven, and where local areas continue to miss out. So I hope to explore this in an objective and rational way with the front bench. But I do want to draw attention to the urgent and growing concerns of the Police and Crime Commissioner for Cleveland regarding funding of our local police force. And despite serving one of the most deprived and high crime areas in the country, Cleveland Police remains the force with the lowest number of officers compared to 2010, a reduction of some 12%, leaving the community more vulnerable and officers overstretched. And with the greatest respect, the recent funding settlement does compound the problem. Cleveland received the smallest increase in the country, just 3.3%, which, after accounting for inflation and pay awards, leaves a real-term shortfall of around 2.4 million. That's equivalent to 40 officers. Yet the government continues to expect this deficit to be met through local council tax. And I just respectfully suggest that's unreasonable.
Gentlemen, he seemed to be, he was practically spitting with anger when he talked about the Conservative record of increased police officers and a halving of crime, but now he respectfully asked the Minister, and is it his understanding, as a direct result of the settlement that this Minister has brought to this House, that there will be a cut in service level in his deprived communities and making them less safe? Is that his understanding? And if so, perhaps his passion could rise up a little.
Speaker, the difference between me and the honourable gentleman opposite, I am the right honourable gentleman opposite, is that I'm capable of being objective when facts are put in front of me, whereas he appears to be completely myopic and in total denial about his own government's record of decimating our police forces and seeing the consequences of it. So I am perfectly content with making proper representations to the government on the settlements that have been devolved out. It's a perfectly reasonable proposition to put. It's a shame he couldn't participate in a more sensible discussion. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, with almost a third of our neighbourhoods in the top 10% most deprived nationally, local residents can't shoulder a £90 increase on Band D property to restore staffing levels to safe levels. The Police and Crime Commissioner has written 3 times to the Minister seeking urgent clarity about how this settlement was calculated. Each time he hasn't had a response, and I'll just ask the Minister to reflect upon that and come back to me. Our communities and their elected PCC deserve answers. It's not just a matter of fairness, it's a matter of public safety. And without adequate funding, Cleveland Police can't meet the government's own objectives of reducing knife crime, tackling violence against women and girls, and maintaining effective neighbourhood policing. Madam Deputy Speaker, the people of Cleveland, their PCC, and the officers on the front line have done everything asked of them, exceeding recruitment targets, investing in neighbourhood policing, and achieving crime reductions above the national average. And of course, I reflect upon their incredible efforts in the response to the riot on the 4th of August 2024. It was the most remarkable response of police and community banding together in the wake of the most violent attack upon our own community. And I must pay tribute to the incredible work that they did, because they have never, ever had to deal with anything like that. And they did it with such incredible dedication and professionalism that we cannot ever be thankful enough for them, to them for their efforts. But again, I would just ask that the Minister does reflect upon this settlement, because I'm not convinced that this is reflective of their efforts and redistributing scarce resources to other forces with less need. So I therefore urge the Government to revisit the settlement urgently, to properly resource Cleveland Police based on need, deprivation and demand, and not on population alone, and to provide the answers the PCC and our communities rightly deserve. Madam Deputy Speaker, our officers deserve the support they have earned, and our residents deserve the safety and security that only properly funded policing can provide. Thank you.
I call the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Max Wilkinson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to start by declaring an interest. My father-in-law is the police chaplain for North Yorkshire Police, and my brother-in-law, here indeed, and my brother-in-law is an inspector in North Yorkshire Police too. And I'd then like to segue into thanking them, but also Inspector Steve Benbow, who leads the policing team in Cheltenham and does a terrific job in difficult circumstances. Now, the Liberal Democrats have long called for a return to proper community policing. Unfortunately, those numbers fell under the last Conservative government, and it is clear to me from speaking to people in my constituency and elsewhere that people want a visible and trusted police presence in their community to focus on preventing and on solving crimes. Far too many crimes at the moment, like shoplifting, bike theft, tool theft and so many more, go unsolved, and ordinary people pay the price. Police stations and front desks are disappearing at an alarming rate, even under this government, leaving people with nowhere to go. Now, Labour has promised the public 13,000 more police officers, but instead frontline officer numbers have fallen. By September last year, we had 1,300 fewer officers than the year before, and in March 2025, the number of frontline police officers was down by more than 4,300 compared to March 2024. That is why it's so important that these police reforms are got right, and we must see improvements in the numbers of frontline policing as soon as possible. I will.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. I'd just like to highlight one case from Flamstead where David, who was a toolsman, a tradesman, had his van broken into 10 times. On the 10th time, he called the police while they were there, but it still took them many days to arrive. He's now decided to retire because it's too expensive to keep going. So would the honourable member agree with me? This is why that frontline community service from the police is so important.
Absolutely. My honourable friend from Harpenden and Berkhamsted makes an important point. When we call the police, we expect them to turn up. And I don't actually blame the police officers for not showing up. If there's simply not enough of them to do the job, that is a problem which is a hangover from the last government, and this government must go faster to solve those problems. Now, if we don't...
Sorry, will the honourable gentleman give way?
Of course. I give way to the member from Beverley and Holden.
He may have inadvertently just suggested that somehow there was a reduction in police numbers. There were a record number of police officers, the highest in the history of this country when the Conservatives left power, and that number has been reduced frontline and back office and PCSOs, each and every one of them reduced by that police minister, that government opposite. And I know the honourable gentleman, who's always an honest and straightforward member of this House, wouldn't want to suggest that the Conservatives had left us with reduced numbers when in fact they had increased.
I thank the honourable member for his. I thank the honourable member for his. I thank the honourable member for his interruption and also for the many communications that are coming from the other side of the chamber. I have to say, when I hear the Labour Party and Conservative Party arguing about police numbers, I just think this is an excellent advert for voting for one of the other parties. Now, if the government is serious about restoring neighbourhood policing, it needs to step up, get this reform right and get more officers back onto our streets. Ministers have suggested numbers will be increasing. We do not doubt their good intentions, but they will ultimately be judged on results. We cautiously welcome the government's suggestion that it will assign a police team to every council ward level, but the devil will be in the detail. So I ask the Minister, and I'm happy to take an intervention if she would like to put me straight, because we've asked a written question, will each ward, each council ward level, have its own policing team, and will that be unique to that ward, or is it simply assigned en masse to several wards, one and the other?
At the moment, we have a situation where each area has its own named contactable officer. We are going even further so that each ward will have its own named contactable officer. So these are hyper-local police.
And based on the Minister's answer, I can assume that that ward has its own police officer, and that police officer has only one ward to deal with. No, you have multiple wards. The honourable gentleman for Huntingdonshire, from a sedentary position, suggests that each police officer will have multiple wards. I wonder whether the Minister can clarify.
Just to be clear, by the end of this Parliament, there will be 13,000 extra neighbourhood police, and the honourable gentleman can divide that by... Yes, please. Yes, please.
I assume the Minister's making an intervention on Mr Wilkinson, not continuing a debate. Please make the intervention and then the member can respond.
PCSOs are police, just to be clear. Police officers, they're not warranted, but they are police. 13,000 extra police in our neighbourhoods. I'll have to do the maths in terms of dividing that between each ward, but there will be a named contactable officer in each ward that people can...
And so before you feed the front bench, will have opportunities to respond at the end of the debate as well. Max Wilkinson.
I thank the Minister for intervening. I will take the helpful intervention, I think, from the member from Huntingdon.
I would concur with this point and what the Minister just said. I know that in Cambridgeshire, our named neighbourhood officers, who are a little bit difficult to pin down exactly how many and how big an area they cover, but each officer covers a vast area. I know that the officer, for example, who covers the town of St Ives, that's the whole town, of which there are multiple wards, covers every area between St Ives and Ramsey, which includes several villages as well. So it is for the birds to suggest that Cambridgeshire Constabulary is going to have enough named officers to cover every single ward that is represented currently by local government.
I thank the member for his intervention, and this is the point that I'm trying to draw out. The white paper is somewhat non-specific on this. It does say that there will be a named contact for each ward. The suggestion is that that might be just one person or one police officer, a PCSO, per ward, with no other responsibilities for that police officer. I don't believe that will be the case on the numbers that are being presented, which means that the white paper perhaps is somewhat misleading to people. I'm not suggesting ministers for a moment would like to mislead the House, but the White Paper does need clarification. Now, if communities are to have confidence that stretched local police teams can deal with local issues, particularly things like illegal e-scooters and illegal e-bikes, they need to have certainty that police teams are available and accessible. Failure to do so will lead to more people feeling unsafe and, sadly, more tragedies. In my constituency of Cheltenham, Madam Deputy Speaker, we recently suffered the loss of an 18-year-old who was riding an illegal e-scooter in a road traffic collision. And in my constituency and in constituencies up and down the country, we frequently witness e-bikes travelling at speed, often on pavements and in pedestrian areas. Now, an on-street presence of police would surely deter such activities, and it must be fully funded. Visible policing will also help deter the onslaught of shoplifting this nation is suffering. We must also hope that the government's warm words on this will be backed by action. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we applaud the government for announcing the impending abolition of police and crime commissioners, because we Liberal Democrats have long opposed the politicisation of policing, and we believe that money should be spent elsewhere. However, there is a risk that by splitting these powers from police and crime commissioners between directly elected mayors and the Home Secretary, that will perpetuate the same problems with the politicisation of policing that we have experienced since 2012. The government must make sure that in doing this, it allows crime and police boards made up of local councillors and representatives from relevant local groups, perhaps also including those mayors, to take over and ensure that police resources, the grant that we're talking about today, are properly spent so we do not see money being wasted instead. Now, the Liberal Democrats are also calling for a police front desk in every community across the country. These would be in community halls like libraries, shopping centres and town halls. Such an approach would allow people to report crimes or share information with the police face-to-face in convenient and accessible locations.
Will the Honourable Gentleman give way?
I will.
I'm extremely grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. When I met the Chief Constable of Humberside last week, he talked about Bobby, which is actually an AI tool which is now able to meet 75, in fact pushing up towards 90% of queries. But does the Honourable Gentleman envisage these desks always being manned, or would a computer or AI-based system be suitable in his view?
I thank the Honourable Gentleman from Beverley and Holderness for his intervention. We would envisage these being staffed. Clearly, people want to see police face-to-face. AI can have a role, although we all know that there is a cautionary tale from the West Midlands recently that we would, I think, like to put behind us. But AI surely has a role. But in the proposals that we are putting forward, you would have staffed desks in convenient community hubs. Now, I ask the ministers to consider that before going on to say, as members in this House will know, crime is not only focused in cities and towns, and many members in the chamber today represent rural constituencies. Now, the NFU Mutual estimated that there was a cost of rural crime in 2024 as high as £44.1 million. That is a shocking cost to our countryside. We must consider the impact on those who live in rural areas, and specifically farmers who are having a really difficult time at the moment. Their mental health and mental well-being can be badly harmed by crime. A survey of 115 NFU Mutual agents found that 92% believed rural crime was disrupting farming activities in their area, and 86% knew farmers who had been repeat victims of crime, leaving them feeling vulnerable in both their workplace and in their home. Rural communities have seen increasingly organised and damaging offences, yet only a small proportion of the police workforce is dedicated to tackling them. Rural crime is currently dealt with by just 0.4% of the overall police workforce.
Will the honourable member give way?
Of course I will, yes.
I'm really grateful. He's making an excellent point about rural crime. And my concern is that as the boundaries for these police forces become greater, that the resources then tend to go to the urban areas. And we see this in East Devon, where Cranbrook has sucked in resources from villages and towns that previously have had a police presence. Does he also recognise that this effect of pulling police into urban areas is taking place in other parts of the country?
I thank my honourable friend from Tiverton and Honiton for his intervention. It was timely, and when we discuss the structures of policing, clearly if we are imposing wider boundaries as the government intends to, what we need to make sure is that their pledges for local community policing areas are followed through on, and I think the answers that we had in the debate between very many people about 5 minutes ago, they tell us that the story is not yet told by the government in a way that will reassure my community or his. Now, rural communities are increasingly concerned with the increase in crime that they are seeing, and they want to be reassured that ministers are allocating the funding needed to tackle it. With the report that we're considering today, there are so few references to rural areas in the countryside. Can we be reassured that rural crime will be tackled by a specific team in every police force? We're calling for a countryside copper guarantee, which would see properly resourced, dedicated rural crime teams or specialists embedded in every police force. And whether it will deliver, and will the government pledge to deliver the equipment, specialist knowledge and communication tools needed to tackle these crimes effectively? Now, the Shadow Home Secretary mentioned facial recognition technology. Now, we accept that this technology has the potential to improve the outlook for members of the public and to make the police's job easier too. But it does place our civil liberties at risk, and we must not be relaxed about that. In December 2025, the UK's data protection watchdog asked the Home Office for urgent clarity over the racial bias of police facial recognition technology. And official Home Office research has shown that the technology identifies the wrong person about 100 times more often for Asian and black people than it does for white people, and twice as often for women than men. We seek reassurances, I will in a moment, we seek reassurances that this technology will not be used unless the data can be safely captured, and we seek assurance from ministers that those in minority communities won't be misidentified and wrongly arrested. And we hope ministers can reassure us that the data will be stored appropriately, and this will not result in the widespread retention of data relating to innocent people. So will the government consider statutory guidance on this technology to ensure that each police force takes a common and safe approach? And I will take an intervention from the Shadow Home Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Lib Dem spokesman. Just on the 2 points he raised, I looked into those when I was police minister. On the first one about allegations of racial disproportionality, those arose in about 2017 or 2018. The system has subsequently been updated significantly and was tested by the National Physical Laboratory about 2 or 3 years ago. And at the setting the police use it, there is now no racial disproportionality at all. That is a historic problem that's now been fixed. On his second question about data retention, the way the system operates is that if a member of the public, like he or I, who is not on the wanted list, I assume, walks past the camera, then our image is automatically and immediately deleted, which I hope addresses his concern about data retention.
I thank the Shadow Home Secretary for addressing those 2 points. I can reassure him I'm not on the wanted list, but I can only speak for myself. Now, it's useful clarification. I think I would like it from ministers as well, perhaps in the summing up later on, and I'm sure ministers will be able to reassure me. Now, the minister who sits beside the policing minister there will share my view that police must be better at tackling violence against women and girls. And I know she's done a huge amount of work on this. Now, survivors of VAUG and domestic abuse deserve to know that properly funded support services will be there. We must also be reassured that police have the training to enable them to address so-called honour-based abuse. The government should look at introducing high-quality perpetrator programmes in domestic abuse cases with the aim of preventing further abuse. And for those victims already suffering, ministers must make it easier for victims to come forward. They should consider rolling out a Home Office-led national public awareness campaign that tackles myths around domestic abuse and violence against women and girls, which signposts victims to support services and promotes the role of the new VAUG task force. And there is already some really good publicity going out, which we will have seen on our televisions. Survivors must always be able to safely report incidents to the police, although the complexities of these cases mean there are additional needs which must be addressed. So we seek reassurance that police forces will provide for anonymous reporting options and embedding VAUG and domestic abuse specialists in every 999 operator assistance centres. There will be both important measures to help victims report incidents to the police. Now, these should bring together officers and specialists with the training, resources and capacity to effectively support survivors, including by working in partnership with frontline women's services. So will the Minister commit to establishing these specialist task forces in every police force? Finally, we ask whether in considering this report we are yet again looking at smoke and mirrors. It's the same whichever government it is in terms of funding. The government's figures assume a maximum police precept rise in every local area, pushing part of the funding settlement discussion to local areas. Shouldn't governments of all colours just be clearer about that in their communications?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I think before I make my remarks and plead to the government, I must respond to the complete nonsense from the Shadow Minister and the members opposite. The 14 years since 2010 saw catastrophic cuts to the police service, a rise in recorded crime, unmanageable police force budget deficits, and the demise of neighbourhood policing and the near destruction of the probation service. No part of the criminal justice system was spared from mismanagement. And it's incredible that the penny still hasn't dropped, that when austerity is forced upon areas, then antisocial behaviour and fragile communities are the outcome. So the benches opposite would excuse this government for not taking lectures from the party opposite. Now, this debate is crucial as it's about how we fund the services that keep our communities safe and resilient. Safe communities are the foundation of economic growth and local prosperity. Businesses invest where towns feel secure. Families settle where neighbourhoods are stable. Regeneration succeeds when antisocial behaviour is tackled and police are visible and responsive. Public safety underpins economic renewal and long-term confidence. Our Police and Crime Commissioner, Joy Allen, has raised serious and legitimate concerns about the structural pressures facing Durham and Darlington under the current funding framework. Those concerns are not about performance. Durham Constabulary is highly regarded and delivers daily for our communities. It's about capacity and sustainability. In Durham, we have one of the lowest council tax bases in England and a very high proportion of Band A properties. Each £1 added to the police precept, therefore, raises significantly less locally than it does in many other force areas. In practice, a 1% increase in the precept in County Durham generates £490,000, where in Surrey it generates approximately £1.7 million. And at a time when we are rightly focused on narrowing the north-south divide, the funding framework risks reinforcing this. North Road in Durham is a clear example of why sustained neighbourhood policing matters. It's one of the city's busiest corridors and at times has been a hotspot for shoplifting and antisocial behaviour, particularly drug and alcohol abuse, placing real pressure on local traders and a perception of fear for residents and visitors. In response, Durham Constabulary has worked with businesses to introduce Shopwatch, a scheme that it now holds regular meetings with retailers to share intelligence, coordinate action and improve visibility. And that kind of partnership approach is starting to make a difference, but it relies on having the capacity and presence on the ground to sustain it. And County Durham also covers a large and diverse geographical area, with dispersed rural communities creating distinct policing pressures in terms of travel time, visibility and response. And a prime example of that is when yobs on e-bikes terrorise our villages, our football clubs and walkers. People feel scared, but police cannot reach them in time to take action. A single national framework doesn't therefore produce equal outcomes. The same policy decision yields very different resources, and over time that gap compounds. But between 2010 and 2020, under the Conservative government, Durham Constabulary lost 408 officers, around 20% of its workforce, and officer numbers have still not returned to 2010 levels. That's meant sustained pressure on neighbourhood teams and frontline capacity across that wide geography. For 3 consecutive years, local consultation has shown that residents are willing to invest more where it protects visible neighbourhood policing and community safety. There's a democratic backing locally for strengthening capacity. The issue is not willingness, it's the ability. When funding depends heavily on council tax capacity, areas with lower property values are structurally constrained, regardless of need or performance. Equal percentage increases in grant do not offset unequal precept yield. So if we want to see places like Durham flourish to attract investment, support local business and build confident communities, then the framework for funding policing must not entrench the inequality between regions that soared during the party opposite's imposed austerity measures. Safer communities... I will give way.
The Honourable Lady, I mean, she's giving a very powerful speech, and as she says, there will be that regressive impact of this police grant settlement, which is going to see higher and higher council tax on low-earning residents in her area, and because of rising costs, actually reduced policing, and that's obviously concerning. And I wonder how she's going to take that up with ministers to try and effect change.
Before they jump on their feet, it's completely up to them if they wish to take an intervention. I'm on my feet. Completely up to the member if they wish to take an intervention. Mary Kelly-Foy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. No, happy with that intervention, and the point that the member raised, if he cares to listen to my response. No?
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
The point I'm raising, that is exactly what I'm doing now. I'm urging the government to look again at the council tax the precepts, and because we are playing catch up, as you know, the government are playing catch up for the years and years of mismanagement and austerity under the members' government. So, safer communities enable growth. The settlement should reflect that principle fairly and consistently across the country if we're ever to repair the damage caused by the Conservative government's period in office. Thank you.
Ben Obese-Jecty.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The current funding system is complex, outdated and the product of legacy decisions rather than strategic design. Not my words, but the words of the government in the last month's police reform white paper. And I agree, which is why I don't approve of the police grant report England and Wales for 2026-27, because the complex, outdated and legacy police allocation formula sees Cambridgeshire Constabulary down at the bottom of the list of forces for police funding per head, and yet the government is still using it. Since being elected to the House, I've called on the government to change this repeatedly, and it continues to be an issue that concerns my constituents. Reliance upon a formula based on data from 2001 continues to maintain the existing imbalance in funding that the government know cannot continue. And the government has already committed to updating the police allocation formula as part of their commitment to restructuring the 43 police forces in England and Wales. But this will not take place for years, and it will be years more before we see any benefit locally. So how will current recruitment and resourcing now dovetail into these new force structures? What rebalancing will take place, and would it not have made sense to have done the work on future structures first, so that the roadmap to the new model of policing could be better articulated? The government is already on the hook to fulfil their neighbourhood policing guarantee, but 2 weeks ago the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners released a statement that clearly outlined that the settlement is only sufficient to fund the increase in personnel promised by the government under the neighbourhood policing guarantee in part. With funding for hotspot policing already rolled into the neighbourhood policing grant, where are we with the recruitment of the 13,000 additional police officers, PCSOs and specials? That 13,000 was first announced in February 2023 by the then Home Secretary. In March 2023, the number of full-time officers was 142,145. In March 2024, just before the general election, this figure had reached 147,745, an increase of 5,600. By March 2025, this figure had fallen to 146,442, a 1% decrease year on year. So exactly what progress has been made in recruiting these 13,000 additional officers? What is the baseline figure that this is being benchmarked against? Is it March 2023 when the pledge was made? Is it March 2024, the most recent data available when Labour came into government? Or March 2025 when the funding to recruit these officers actually came on stream? Happy to take an intervention from the Policing Minister if she'd like to clarify exactly what the baseline figure is. No. As far as I'm aware, that baseline figure has never been clarified, and when I asked that question to the previous Policing Minister, I got back a waffly non-response that didn't even attempt to answer the question. Does the government even know? No, nothing. Coming back to the point that the Liberal Democrat spokesman made earlier on when talking about the number of police officers per ward, St Ives and Ramsey in my constituency has 6 officers in total. That's across the police sergeant, PCs and PCSOs, 6 officers for 10 wards, and in Huntingdon it's 8 for 11. So that's 14 to cover 21. So we're already 7 officers down, and that's assuming that none of those officers ever have a day off, are ever on holiday, are ever sick. I do not see where we are going to gain those additional officers that the Policing Minister implies that are going to be received under the Neighbourhood Policing Guarantee in order to maintain that shortfall. We want to deliver the increase in neighbourhood policing the Government has pledged. But this can only be done if it is fully funded. Current funding covers the cost of approximately 750 additional officers, so it is unclear how forces will be able to fund the remaining 1,000 neighbourhood officers to which the Government has committed. The APCC Joint Leads on Local Policing, Chris Nelson and Matt Story, have highlighted that, as things stand, the maths simply do not add up. Less than a year ago, we saw the Government revise down the neighbourhood policing figures. A staggering 31 of the 43 police forces in England and Wales amended their figures, having overstated them, resulting in a net reduction of 2,611 police officers and PCSOs, a 13% decrease. They'd included student officers based in the classroom, not out on patrol. They included officers double-counted on out-of-date HR systems. West Midlands Police had their true neighbourhood policing figure reduced by 62%, Gloucestershire by 65%, Wiltshire and Suffolk by over 50%. Is that 2,611 factored into the 13,000? The Minister earlier on said that there had been an extra 2,400 officers, neighbourhood police officers, but you're already 2,611 down, so we're net negative 211 officers. You'll forgive my scepticism about the accuracy of the Government's policing plan. I give way to the Minister.
Just to be clear, there are 2,400 extra neighbourhood police in our neighbourhoods. That is our policy, is to tilt resources into our neighbourhoods, because the previous government decimated neighbourhood policing and we're building it back up.
I appreciate the Minister's intervention. I understood that point. My point was that those 2,400 don't even make up the 2,611 that the Government has already reduced the number of neighbourhood police officers by recounting the number of officers that we have.
Smoke and mirrors.
Smoke and mirrors indeed. Last month's police reform white paper does little to clear up any confusion. We are aware the cost of police reform has been estimated at around 500 million, while the Government has announced that 119 million will be allocated to the reform programme in 2026-27, said the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. Those police and crime commissioners have been scrapped, transferring police governance in 2028 to strategic authority mayors or policing and crime boards. Whilst it mentions that the latter would be expanded to reflect larger forces in the future, it doesn't explain how strategic authority mayors' responsibilities would be restructured.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. On that topic, the point you're just making about funding and police and crime commissioners, who are saying that police funding has been cut, etc., and we're getting rid of police and crime commissioners, is that not money better spent directly with the police forces rather than to the Office of Police and Crime Commissioners?
To be honest, I see, the way that we're looking at the police and crime commissioners, it hasn't really been clarified exactly how that responsibility is going to work across the country. And the point that I was trying to make there was that we're saying that the authority for policing locally is going to go to strategic mayors. That's fine, but if you're going to also merge forces, who will have primacy amongst those strategic mayors? For example, Cambridgeshire, that will devolve to the mayor of the combined authority. If that force is to merge with other forces in East Anglia, for example, a future mayor of Norfolk and Suffolk, which of those two mayors will have primacy over that area? I'll give way.
Grateful to my honourable gentleman. It's just that sort of incoherence which is upsetting my constituents. Humberside Police Force, the finest in the country, has a mayor on the North Bank and another mayor on the South Bank. So who exactly is going to be in charge of this police force? We don't know what's going to replace it, we don't have the detail, and we don't know what it'll cost. All we do know from government reorganisations through the years, whoever's in charge, they're normally slower, they're more costly, and they don't normally deliver as much as government at the beginning hopes from.
Good point.
Thank you. I agree with my right honourable friend, and I would hope that that will be clarified either by one of the ministers in the summing up, or there'll be further clarity within the white paper, because I've read the white paper and it currently isn't explained. We've also received little explanation of the way that the independent review of force structures will work, who the independent chair will be, and when and how they will be appointed, when the terms of reference will be published, whether we as members of Parliament will be included within the scope of the policing stakeholders referenced in the white paper. Some clarity regarding the process behind such seismic and sweeping changes desperately needs to be outlined. There are serious concerns that the new model for policing will not address some of the key resource requirements for rural forces, instead seeing cities and larger towns taking up an ever-growing share of the available resources. Last week, I spoke to local NFU members in my constituency. For the second year running, concerns regarding rural crime, specifically hare coursing, were raised by local farmers. This is a topic that we rarely hear spoken about in this chamber, or by the government, and it is incomprehensible to many that idyllic rural locations could find themselves in the grip of violent organised crime. But that is a situation that so many find themselves in.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
Is my honourable friend concerned about not only that, but also increased industrial scale dumping in rural areas, and also the additional pressures on neighbourhood policing, whether it's with increased illegal immigrants going into hotels and house of multiple occupancy, and those being let out of prison that the neighbourhood policers are going to have to man-mark because of Labour's sentencing bill?
Ben Obese-Jecty.
I thank my honourable friend, and there are so many different aspects to this that the police are required to pick up the slack on, and I don't think that is factored into or reflected in the way that we are looking at the force structures, and I would hope that it would be factored into the review of the forces going forwards. Coming back to rural crime, in my constituency of Huntingdon, Cambridgeshire Constabulary has an effective and successful rural crime action team. They're only 14 strong and covering a huge rural area. This must be factored into discussions and not risk being lost in the maelstrom of focus upon big-ticket policing items brought under national control and a myopic focus on urban and neighbourhood policing. And I would add to that, it is my understanding that the Rural Crime Action Team, who specialise in dealing with machinery theft, GPS theft, hare coursing, have been moved from being operational support unit officers to being designated as neighbourhood policing. They are specialist officers required to do a specialist role. They are not bobbies on the beat in the villages around my constituency, and they are never going to be that. And so it is annoying to see that they are being restructured in that way. Redesignating rural crime specialist officers and neighbourhood officers to balance the books and tick an administrative box isn't going to cut it. But Cambridgeshire Constabulary have proved themselves to be an effective force with the swift manner in which they neutralised the assailant following the Huntingdon train attack last November. Speaking to my local officers, there are huge inconsistencies with the way in which each force is managed, and I would ask the Policing Minister for clarity on how those discrepancies will be harmonised intra-force. We know that the way in which overtime for police officers is calculated lacks consistency from force to force, as does the application of the adjustment bank for outstanding hours owed. These are issues that are affecting officers on the ground. Not every issue in policing is an operational resourcing question. Much of the pressure officers are experiencing is due to administrative inconsistencies, from pay inequality with the South East allowance to officers wearing body armour that has passed its expiration date because of failings in the procurement system, a tragic front-page scandal waiting to happen. To conclude, I would ask the Policing Minister to consider ring-fencing funding for rural crime action teams in the new force structure so that rural crime can be eradicated once and for all. Pay disparities, particularly eligibility for the South East allowance and the application of overtime eligibility and management of the adjustment bank. Consortium contracting, particularly the risk posed by reliance upon one-maker vehicles and indeed the use of Volvo by any forces, given they are now owned by the Chinese Xinjiang Geely Holding Group. I believe I have a forthcoming meeting scheduled with the Policing Minister, and I would be keen to continue the discussion around these issues with her then. On behalf of the officers in my county who have received a raw deal for far too long.
Edward Morello.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The 2026-27 settlement delivers a cash increase nationally, but once again fails to address the structural unfairness faced by rural forces such as Dorset. It does not properly reflect rurality, seasonal population increases, or the cumulative impact of more than a decade of underfunding. Dorset Police is consistently one of the worst funded forces in the country. It ranks in the bottom 10 nationally for total funding, receiving around 203 million, and sits at roughly 26 out of 43 forces on a per capita basis. Despite covering over 1,000 square miles of largely rural geography, Dorset Police remains below the national average funding per head and far behind most urban and metropolitan forces. The 26-27 settlement does nothing to change that relative position. The settlement assumes that police and crime commissioners will raise tax by the full 15 Band D precinct. In Dorset, that assumption is particularly problematic. Around 51% of Dorset police funding already comes from local council taxpayers, compared with a national average of 34%, and as little as 20% in some of the better funded forces. Because Dorset has a smaller and slower growing council tax base, even the same £15 increase raises far less in real terms than it does in urban areas. This settlement therefore locks in a reliance on council tax in a way that systematically disadvantages rural counties. We have seen this kind of a Treasury assumption, where this kind of Treasury assumption leads before. Similar flawed assumptions in fire service funding has resulted in plans to close fire stations in Maiden Newton and Charmouth. Once again, decisions are being based on unrealistic expectations of local funding with consequences for rural communities. Although the government has stated that the recent 2.4% police pay settlement is fully funded nationally, in Dorset it's very different. For Dorset Police, that settlement alone required £500,000 of savings to be found locally. Over the past 3 years, the force has had to make £2.8 million in savings, with a direct impact on staffing levels. Meanwhile, 7 forces nationally are able to generate surpluses year after year, while 6 forces, including Dorset, are forced to find savings just to stand still or in many cases regress. This is not a fair or sustainable system. It makes a mockery of the government's neighbourhood policing guarantee, even after the proposed long-term reforms. Dorset is one of the 11 forces that has still not returned to 2010 officer levels. And when neighbourhood policing funding is examined in isolation, Dorset is the worst funded force in the country. Of course I will give way.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. Over the weekend I went on a walk around with my local police officers in Boscombe and in Springbourne, and they were talking about the need to make sure that, particularly over the summer months, neighbourhood police teams were not seeing significant, in their words, abstractions of police officers from our communities into the seafront, but also the town centre, because Bournemouth particularly sees very large tourism and large numbers of people coming in from outside who sometimes cause criminality. They also welcome the neighbourhood guarantee, which will see an increase in neighbourhood police forces. Would he agree with me that we need to make sure that we keep our neighbourhood police forces in their neighbourhoods?
Morello.
I thank my fellow Dorset MP for his intervention, and he will know that we welcome a huge number of tourists, which are vital for our local hospitality and tourism economy. And while we want people to come, it does put incredible strain on our local police forces, and the funding does need to reflect that population increase. Forces that routinely... Of course I will give way. In fact,
extremely grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. I mean, one of the dangers, while you're cutting the police, 1,300 last year alone, estimated by my Police and Crime Commissioner, another 4,000 nationally could go next year, is they come up with the smoke and mirrors, talk about neighbourhood policing, and ask the honourable gentleman, does he want to protect those? If an artificial number set from the centre leads to the removal of police officers from where they're needed locally to meet local need, that's not a good thing. And I hope he, as a proper Liberal Democrat, would recognise local decision-making needs to guide this most, and we need to have a government not playing with smoke and mirrors.
well, I thank the right honourable gentleman for saving me from the indignity of not being intervened on by him during this debate. And I do agree that local police forces do need to be local, and we want bobbies on the beat everywhere. Forces that routinely generate surpluses are able to invest in more officers, better technology and healthy reserves. Dorset cannot do that. Dorset Police serves large, sparsely populated areas like West Dorset, meaning longer response times, higher fuel costs and fewer economies of scale. Rural areas also tend to have less CCTV, fewer ANPR cameras and generally less witnesses, making crime harder and more resource-intensive to investigate. National analysis shows that the average rural police force budget is £6.03 million compared with £8.52 million for urban forces. On top of that, Dorset faces intense seasonal pressures. As we discussed before, West Dorset alone sees a 42% population increase during peak tourist months, and Dorset as a whole receives 25 million day visitors each year.
Would my honourable friend give way?
Of course I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I want to follow on from my honourable friend from Bournemouth East as well. In just asking the policing minister again, would you agree that it's about time we got an
order? I don't agree. I do agree. I'm pretty neutral, so asking the member to agree and not using the term you.
I can only apologise, Madam Chair. Would my honourable friend agree that it is long overdue that the policing minister replied to the calls from Dorset MPs and Police and Crime Commissioner from November last year to look at the seasonality issue, because we simply cannot go on?
To help other members in case they make the same error, I'm not Madam Chair, I am Madam Deputy Speaker. Edward Morello.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and of course I agree with my Dorset neighbour. We have all Dorset MPs have written to repeated ministers to ask for a fairer funding settlement, and I shall speak to some of those issues. None of the additional demand caused by our population increases during the summer months is properly funded. Dorset Police faced a £3.6 million funding deficit in 2024, rising to £7.3 million last year. Despite submitting evidence-backed requests for additional funding of £12.2 million annually to recruit around 250 extra officers and staff, that support has not been provided. Instead, the police force has been forced to cut community support officers by 43%, freeze recruitment, sell vehicles and building, restrict overtime and halt non-essential spending. If the government is serious about fair policing and neighbourhood visibility, 2 immediate steps are needed, alongside the restructuring and long-term reforms our rural police service is calling for. First, greater preset flexibility for forces like Dorset that are already asking far more of local taxpayers than others. Secondly, as a stopgap, forces holding reserves above 5% should contribute back to a central redistribution pot, particularly when recommended levels are closer to 3%. The proposed reforms are coming too late to make a difference on the ground to what people want to see from their police force. But this police grant report delivers more cash, but no structural fixtures. This comes before the police reforms the Home Secretary laid out before this House a few weeks ago are even implemented. As part of these reforms, we must reassess how we properly fund rural police forces to allow for proper neighbourhood policing. In its current form, the grant means that rural forces like Dorset, once inflation, demand, population increases and geography are factored in, it's closer to standstill funding rather than a genuine uplift. If we want safer rural communities, visible neighbourhood policing and public confidence in fairness, the funding formula must finally reflect what rural constituencies experience on a day-to-day basis.
Steff Aquarone.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Before I delve into the issues facing policing in Norfolk, I have to discuss some of the simply incredible ways that funding allocations are decided within the police grant report, which we're debating today. It's just another example of a part of how our government functions, which is rapidly becoming unfit for purpose and somehow is not changing fast enough with the times. An array of complex sums based on data from as long ago as 2001 census is dictating how many police officers in my constituency we can expect to see on the street over the next year. If you ask the average person in the street, Madam Deputy Speaker, how their local police force funding was decided, I'd argue very few would guess that a long formula, which includes multipliers such as the daytime net inflow in 2001, a population projection for 2013, and the number of unemployed men in between 2009 and 2012. In fact, the number of pubs and bars in an area is linked to the funding which a police force receives. In police crime top-ups 1, 3, 4 and 5 and the fear of crime top-up, the greater the number of licensed establishment per 100 hectares, the greater the multiplier the funding the police force will receive. Which leads me to a key question that I hope the Minister can answer in relation to this year's report and next year's funding settlement. With the Chancellor's ongoing war on pubs leading to closures across rural areas like mine, can she confirm that under her formula, not only would a community lose their local pub, but their local police force would also receive less funding the following year as a result? Surely we can create a clearer, more up-to-date, more workable formula than this, which delivers better data and better funding. I note that members of the Home Secretary's own party have called for reflection on this, and so I hope she will take this into consideration. People in North Norfolk want to feel reassured that they're getting a fair deal. I'm not sure the current system delivers that for them. Once upon a time, this formula may have delivered well, but I don't think with the evolving nature of crime, it's well suited for the policing needs of 2026. But whatever logarithms and multipliers the Home Secretary chooses to use, the reality on the ground in my area is clear. Our communities feel less safe than they once did. Community policing has been stripped back. Rural crime is not being handled with the seriousness that it deserves. I will.
Thank my county colleague for giving way. Does he agree that there are particular challenges in Norfolk where, under the previous Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner, not only were all of our police and community support officers made redundant, 150, but also many police stations lost their public access, and that accessibility and visible policing has been eroded as a result?
Steff Aquarone. Intervention, those facts are irrefutable, and I will come on to some of the points that he makes about the unique challenges of policing an area like North Norfolk due to the unique characteristics of our shared county. We're lucky to have a lower than average rate of crime, but that doesn't mean that we should see our provisions cut back or officers' numbers reduced. Security and confidence in public safety is created by a well-funded and trusted police force, not by punishing us for not having enough crime. Maybe the Minister could listen to her colleague and perhaps the future leader, the Health Secretary, in his focus on prevention. Treating much of crime with a public health lens can provide us with sensible and holistic lessons about stopping crime before it happens, not just responding as best we can. Rural crime across the country is also at staggering rates, and that causes real fear for farmers and rural business owners in Norfolk. In Norfolk, our past Conservative Police and Crime Commissioners left us with 0 specialist rural crime officers, an unbelievable statistic for such a rural county. Latest stats show that after pressure from the Liberal Democrats, the numbers have reached the heady heights of 2 officers in 2024. Clearly, we have a long way to go, and I'll be working with our PCC and police chiefs to ensure we can deliver more to tackle rural crime and that the government is giving them what they need to deliver it. I've said time and time again that I am proud, Madam Speaker, to have the oldest population in the country in North Norfolk, but that brings challenges in policing and the way that my residents are targeted by criminals. We know that older people are seen as good marks for fraudsters and scammers. In Norfolk last year, we saw £4.5 million lost in investment fraud. In 2023, almost 100,000 lost to pension fraud, ripping the savings for retirement away from some. We have to crack down on this awful form of crime, which has serious financial as well as emotional impact on its victims. It saddens me that this prevalence of fraud and scams could make our communities less trusting and less confident in the goodness of others, all because of the actions of criminal groups out there to steal their hard-earned money. We also need to sadly accept that with the benefits that AI can bring, it will also be one of the ways it can be damaging. Scammers with access to AI can utilise it to make their scams more widespread and more efficient, hitting more people within shorter time frames. So when the long-promised AI bill comes to the House, it would be great if we could see steps that are being taken to address this. We Liberal Democrats have called for the establishment of an online crime agency to focus on fraud and scammers who prey on my constituents. I hope the government can look carefully at our proposals and make sure that we're taking action to stop these criminals damaging our communities. Madam Speaker, I'm not sure how many more police grant reports we'll debate in this House which have Norfolk as its own line item, as the government's white paper seems to be strongly flirting with the idea of merging us with as many as 2 or even 3 other counties. In my view, this is just another step that takes us further away from policing in the community and an understanding of what an area needs. A lack of local leadership, making police chiefs even more distant, and the notion that policing priorities in Stalham could be dictated from as far away as Peterborough doesn't make sense to our constituents. The government are returning to type, centralising power and trying to sell it back to us with the promise of some meagre back office savings. It's their approach to local government reorganisation, to devolution and now to policing as well. We want them to make sure that Norfolk can stop crime, solve crime and make our community safer, not waste time and energy rejigging structures without a promise of improved outcomes. Madam Speaker, I know that North Norfolk is a fantastic community, which is lucky to see less crime than other parts of the country, but that's something which we've worked hard to achieve. I'm grateful to the hard work of Norfolk Constabulary, who keep my constituents safe and supported, and now it's time for the government to listen to their needs and make sure the money and the resource they need to keep us safe is being delivered.
Final backbench contribution, Clive Jones.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. As my honourable friend, the member for Cheltenham, said earlier, Liberal Democrats have long called for a return to proper community policing. After years of Conservative chaos and mismanagement, it's clear in Wokingham and across the country that there are not enough police officers. Residents in Wokingham are always telling me that they want to see more bobbies on the beat, and they want a visible and trusted police presence in our communities, focusing on preventing and solving crimes. This community presence is important, but it is not the only reason that we need greater police numbers. Many in Wokingham tell me that they need to see better police responses to crime as well. Shop managers don't want to feel that shoplifting isn't important when they contact the police. Early last year, I visited several stores in Wokingham, Minbrook and Arborfield to speak with managers about shoplifting. Stores were seeing increasingly frequent and targeted incidents of shoplifting, which was impacting their business and their customers. It was clear that store managers needed better responses from the police to tackle shoplifting when the incident is actually happening. Needless to say, Better police responses to tackle crimes as they happen also helps to prevent future crimes. If the government really wants to restore neighbourhood policing and rebuild public trust in policing, then they need to make sure reforms are done properly and more police officers are put onto our streets and into our communities.
I come to the Shadow Minister, Matt Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I join the House in thanking our frontline police officers and staff for the incredible commitment, contribution and sacrifices they make to keep our streets safe. I'm grateful to the Minister for a statement that I must say has the familiar quality of a government announcing success while the public are left wondering where exactly it's occurred. Because the Minister has come to the House today to present this police funding settlement as a turning point. As if police numbers aren't actually falling, and as if criminals across the country are now packing up their tools and reconsidering their life choices. But outside Westminster, Madam Deputy Speaker, the country looks rather different. The public judge policing in a far more old-fashioned way than ministers do. They judge it not by the tone of a statement, but by whether they see officers on the streets, whether the police answer the telephone, whether they turn up, and whether crime is dealt with when it happens. And on those measures, too many of our constituents feel that policing is being stretched to breaking point. This debate cannot take place without confronting the central fact that sits behind it. Labour promised more police on our streets. Yet since Labour entered government, police officer numbers have fallen, down by more than 1,300. That's not a minor adjustment. It's not an accounting quirk. It's 1,300 fewer police officers available to respond to crime, protect victims and patrol our communities. Gladly.
I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way. We talk about reduction in officer numbers. Is there any consideration or thoughts on actually the numbers that you're talking about have been reduced, or actually those perhaps officers come into retirement, ill health, so we've been on restricted duties, and not actually the officers that were on the street being seen by public, and therefore the perceptions to sustain?
This is the net number of police officers out there on Britain's streets making the difference. There were 149,769. There are now nearly 2,000 less. That has to have a real impact. And while, you know what, we hear about this neighbourhood policing noise, we try to badge things up. Neighbourhood policing has a huge part to play in the policing model, but you can't take away the police who respond to those 999 calls. Should we badge police up, redeploy them, and leave people waiting longer for a response to 999 when they really need it? I will.
I'm extremely grateful to my honourable friend. The powerful speech from the member for North Norfolk. He talked about the rise of scammers and fraudsters. And in that light, I'm concerned about the fact that Humberside, it's been publicly announced by ministers, is getting a 2.4% increase in funding. When you take the costs through, the Police and Crime Commissioner shows it's a 2.9% cut. That's why 1,300 police officers have been cut so far. That's why another expected 4,000 reduction next year, while the Minister goes for this carefully curated number of neighbourhood officers. The overall number is down, and they're not being straight with us.
I couldn't agree more. That's why we're seeing the number of robberies against businesses surge. That's why shoplifting is up. That's why people feel less safe on our streets. Between September 24 and September 25, a period entirely on this government's watch, the number of officers has fallen by 1,318 compared with the year before. More broadly, there are 3,000 less people working in our police forces across this country to keep us safe. In terms of headcount,
I'm grateful to the Shadow Minister for giving way. I hear what he's saying about police numbers, but what was he saying when we lost 500 from our police numbers in Cleveland on his government's watch? Was he concerned then?
Back in 2010, I was deeply concerned about lots of things. The damage to our economy, the number of people without a job, the challenge that the government had to make and those difficult choices. But actually, the last government left office with record numbers of police on our streets. And we'll take another intervention.
I'm grateful. The measuring of police effectiveness by looking solely at numbers is absolutely flawed. Does he accept that the way that Theresa May allowed police numbers to plummet and claimed that crime was not falling was, in retrospect, completely flawed, and we lost a lot of experience through those years.
So when the Conservatives last left office, we had record numbers of police on the streets. I don't know how many police officers we had on the streets when the Liberal Democrats last left office. Progress. I'm going to make some progress. More broadly, there are 3,000 fewer less people working in police forces to keep us safe. In terms of headcount, the picture is starker. In March 2024, under the last government, there were 149,769 officers, the highest number since records began. As of September 2025, that number stands at 147,621, a decrease of more than 2,000. So when the Minister speaks about supporting the police, the House is entitled to ask a simple question: how does a government support policing while presiding over fewer police? Concerningly, the bad news does not stop there. Both the number of officers in the British Transport Police and the number of staff working in the National Crime Agency have also decreased. At the same time as the government announced a National Police Service, which will be created from organisations including the NCA, the staff who will make up this organisation are leaving. This is critical because the grant we're discussing today comes against a backdrop of many forces warning of their long-term financial stability. As the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council stated, the overall financial picture remains challenging. Many forces are planning service reductions with consequences for officer numbers, staff capacity and overall resilience. This is a direct consequence of the decisions of this government. There are real funding challenges with real consequences for forces and communities across the country, here and now. The APCC have said that this year's settlement leaves police forces with a shortfall that could be as high as £500 million. Across the country, Labour's own police and crime commissioners have spoken out on the challenges created. In my own part of the world, Labour PCC, Matt Storey, has said that Cleveland police are having to operate with one hand behind their back, that funding had failed to keep pace with the level of inflation, and while other funding has been removed and reallocated, making it impossible to maintain current levels of service. I understand he's written to the Minister on 3 occasions and still awaits a response. Durham's Labour Police and Crime Commissioner has been even more direct in her criticism of this government's record on policing, saying that this Labour government has consistently demonstrated a complete lack of understanding of policing and community safety. The Minister will no doubt point to headline figures with great enthusiasm. Such spin fails to acknowledge inflation, pay awards and the ongoing cost of the government's jobs tax. Many at home will be stunned that our own police forces were subjected to hundreds of millions of pounds of costs by way of the national insurance increase and the fact that the government has actually taxed the police off our streets. This settlement is not the straightforward increase the Minister claims. It relies heavily on the police precept, pushing more of the burden onto local taxpayers while forces face rising costs and rising demand. In 2023, an MP spoke to this House, claiming that the last government's approach was to put up local taxes, put up council tax, push the problem onto local forces. She added, ministers had chosen to heap the burden onto hard-pressed local taxpayers through the precept. Any ideas who it might have been?
Go on, tell us.
The current policing minister, yes. Given the government's fondness for U-turns, I'm not surprised at the minister's change of view. However, we must be clear that under this Labour government, I will gladly give way.
Why didn't he do this if he was so upset about it?
You are seeing an increasing burden put on local taxpayers. When you're in opposition and you're saying one thing, you arrive at government and you have to make real choices. Those choices have meant cuts to police numbers. They've meant increases in the burden on local taxpayers. It's meant spiralling levels of retail crime and robbery against businesses. The consequences of this approach are as obvious today as they were then. The reliance on the police precept entrenches a postcode lottery in policing. Areas with strong council tax bases can raise more. Areas with weaker council tax bases cannot. Yet the need for policing does not neatly align with local prosperity. Criminals don't check council tax bands before committing burglary. They don't decide where to operate based on local authority revenue forecasts. And yet, under this government's model, two communities can face the same crime pressures but receive very different policing capacity, simply because one can raise money more locally than the other. Perhaps the Minister can tell us what it was that changed her mind about increasing the burden of police funding on local taxpayers, or also, given the articulate case made by the member for Huntingdon, she could tell us, well, in fact, the case made by her in opposition, when we'll see this review of the funding formula. The pressures on policing are not diminishing, they're growing. Forces are dealing with county lines, drug gangs exploiting children, organised crime operating across borders, cybercrime and fraud expanding at industrial scale, and domestic abuse cases which require extensive time, safeguarding and specialist capacity. They're also dealing with public order demands that have become increasingly routine. This is a modern landscape of threats that requires modern capacity, and it cannot be met with funding settlements designed for ministerial speeches rather than frontline realities. Madam Deputy Speaker, this settlement will ultimately be judged not by the Minister's tone, but by its results. Madam Deputy Speaker, this debate comes down to a difference between saying and doing. The government can say it supports policing, but too many see numbers falling. It can say it supports victims, but too many see no justice. And it can claim to be tough on crime while quietly introducing early release schemes that put offenders back on our streets sooner. Until the government's actions match its words, the public will not be convinced, and nor should they be.
Minister Jess Phillips.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to thank all of the members who have contributed to this debate. Big representation from the Liberal Democrats here today. I won't repeat the details of the settlement we are debating today, as they've been set out very clearly by my honourable friend, the Policing Minister. However, I will re-emphasise the importance of the significant investment in policing. It plays a key role in our programme of police reform, through which we will enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of our police service and ensure they are equipped for the future. This settlement also supports neighbourhood policing, the bedrock of the British policing model. We are listening to feedback from forces and giving them flexibility to shape their workforce and meet the demands of modern policing. And now I will come to the points raised in the debate, of which the honourable gentleman who seeks to intervene on me raised many. He'll excuse me if I don't currently. I think that the whole House can agree no one likes the funding formula. I've got to say, I thought it was an especially good trot through from the member for North Norfolk, and whilst not of my political stripes, is considerably better than the previous member for North Norfolk, who has some responsibility, I'd say, for some of the damage that is having to be fixed in this building. But the funding formula fundamentally is if people would like to intervene and think that I've said something that I shouldn't have said, please feel free to defend the one-time Prime Minister of this country who crashed the economy.
Wrong. As ever, I'm afraid this minister gets her facts wrong.
Exactly.
But she is, despite that frailty, she is nonetheless straightforward and pretty outspoken. So could I ask her to give? We get so few of them these days, so I really do look to her to provide them. Could I get direct answers to two questions? Are there fewer police officers now than there were when Labour came to power, and were there record numbers at that time? Are those two facts correct, or are we on this side of the House misleading the House, which we wouldn't want to do?
Minister Phillips.
What I'm going to come to is the points that have been raised in the debate, and that is one, as I have pointed out, the honourable gentleman raised many times. So the answer to the question, and it was a question made by the member for Huntingdon, really specifically about the baseline. And so the baseline of the number of police officers in neighbourhood police, which is measured from the 31st of March, were 17,700. 20,715, and that was the number of police personnel working in the neighbourhood. Now today it is 20,687. I shall also tell a story about the time I went to Cumbria Police recently. I went to Cumbria Police, and what I watched was in the call centre, which I have to say they were doing some really brilliant work, and I met some brilliant domestic violence advisors who were working in that call centre. But the people staffing the call centre were warranted police officers. I don't think that warranted police officers should be staffing the call centres in police departments. I will make some progress. I don't think that they should be doing that, and that is why we are tilting to increase the number of police, 12,000 of them, getting them from behind desks to where they need to be, working on the front line. However, I go back to the consensus in the House today from a number of members, whether it's the City of Durham, whether it's Cleveland, represented by a number of people in this chamber today from different sides of the House, to talk about some of the unfairness that exists within the funding formula, and that the funding formula, it would be ridiculous to currently reform the police funding formula and then do all of the police reforms and then paste it onto a completely new thing, is what I would say. And so, when the review of policing, which the member for Huntingdon has already spoken about and laid out the questions he wanted answering about the white paper, is the point is there is going to be a review of policing and exactly what that new. I like the way you've started saying mega forces as if it will be a bad thing, and to me, I've got to say, it sounds quite cool. But it sounds like something out of RoboCop, which is not government policy. But it is for the member for Huntingdon and every other member in this House to take part in that review and ask those questions that he asked here today of that, and ensure, like everybody will in this place, they will represent their area. And it seems a little remiss of me to not to. Anybody would listen, I have to say, to people talking from the perspective of their. Largely the people who have spoken today came from rural communities or semi-rural communities. One would have me believe from listening to some of that debate that where I live is basically a police state where if you call the police, you'll get somebody out in 5 minutes. I have to say, I recognise the police don't come when people need them. I recognise the exact same issues that every single rural member of Parliament raised around the needs of their police forces, and the idea that in West Mercia, I think was one of the cases, that all of that will be sucked away from Birmingham. Well, I feel the same way about other bits of Birmingham, or I feel the same way about other bits of areas, and that is why we need to reform this system. I was also this morning in a meeting with the 3 of the most senior police officers in our country who are part of the new violence against women and girls policing unit that we have created in government. And what we were talking about was the disparity between the 43 different police forces and the domestic abuse risk assessment that they use. And the disparities in where stalking or honour crime is done well in one or this is done well in the other. And I felt in that meeting, I thought, gosh, we're going to have the opportunity to start from first principles. And if I were to design the police force today on behalf of women and children in our country, I would not have designed the systems that we have today. And so I ask people to enter into the police reform issue with that spirit. With regard to the policing funding formula, there is absolutely no doubt about the fact that, and I suffer from this in Birmingham as well, that a council tax base that is low, to the members who have mentioned that, that does disproportionate, and absolutely when the funding formula as part of the reform of policing takes place, it will have to rely on need, deprivation and demand. as was laid out by the gentleman. And what I'd say with that is that need can do a huge amount of heavy lifting for the members in the room who raised the issue of things like seasonality. I will give way, and then I'm going to stop.
Obese-Jecty.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Minister mentions the factors that will go into the police allocation formula. It's currently based on the population size from 2014 and the density and sparsity figures from 2001. Will those figures, because somewhere like Cambridgeshire has received an additional 300,000 people living there since that formula first came into effect, will that be effective from? And from what date will the population data be taken? Will it be the 2021 census or the 2011 census?
To answer the first question, yes, of course. It would be absolutely... 2001, did he say? I mean... Also, I really enjoyed the little bit of conflab in this debate about like who was to blame for what, and it sort of went back to things being blamed on the last Labour government, which I'd just like to remind everyone in this room we have to be careful of the way that we are seen, because I wasn't old enough to vote the last time the last Labour government came to power, just to be clear that we should update some of our references. But the idea that it would go from 2001 is an absolute, that to me seems completely and utterly ridiculous. But the review will be undertaken to look. But all I can say is, as recent as one would expect, as recent as is possible with data that allows. I can see that people are keen for me to be quiet. So what I would say is that we wish to... I will give way.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm really grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. She talked about a new funding formula need to be based on need and the challenges that the precept creates. We are never going to get fairness if the council tax system is the method of doing it. Is she ruling out getting rid of the police precept as a method of raising funding?
The Honourable Gentleman, far be it from me to literally have the authority to do that right now. I just got to be honest, but like both our colleagues from local government and policing sit here on the front bench and hear the concern about how that interplays. But you're absolutely right. But for me, the thing is about need and trying to make sure that we look at the different things that face different areas. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are committed to giving the police the resources that they need, and that is exactly what this settlement does. We want to see robust neighbourhood policing that engages with the public to build trust and confidence. We are grateful for all the work that the incredible men and women of our police service do, and therefore are determined to provide them with the capability and flexibility, which I have to say is what they have asked for with regards to funding, to have the tools that they require. The removal of arbitrary targets for officer numbers means that local chiefs have more flexibility to shape their workforce, to meet the demands of modern policing and do the vital work behind the scenes. This settlement is only the first step. The 2026-27 settlement therefore provides the police with immediate resources needed to continue their invaluable work alongside the opportunity to invest in the future, and I commend it to the House.
Right. The question is, as on the order paper, as many of that opinion say aye? Aye! Of the contrary, no? The ayes have it. The ayes have it. I'll give the front benches a few moments to shuffle over. Colleagues should leave quickly and quietly so we can continue with the business.